So I'll just do the preamble at the start, just give anyone else that's going to join chance to join the next minute or two before we get really into it. But covering a bit of a whistle-stop tour for the next maybe 30-35 minutes about all aspects of solar, really. Not necessarily going into any one section in great depth, maybe apart from Joe from Electricity Northwest, who's going to talk about one of the really important sections, which is grid connection. But there is plenty of opportunity at the end for questions and anything specific that people want to look at. And all of this will be shared afterwards as well as the slides from the last two events. So this is the third in our three-part series with the Growth Hub. We previously discussed energy efficiency and energy saving measures and the benefits of actually engaging and understanding where your energy is going. And then last week, Elspeth ran a session on managing your carbon footprint. And again, the financial benefits, the wider business benefits of understanding your footprint, getting a grip of it and putting a carbon reduction plan in place. So this is the last one, talking more about one individual tech. We obviously could have gone into lots of other subjects like LED, lighting, wind turbines, but solar is quite an easy one to use as a conduit for the whole thing. It's a relatively simple technology, people are aware of it, and it's been well established and certainly in great demand at the moment. So we're going to run through that and then some of the considerations and some questions at the end. So as I said, we've run a session on energy efficiency, carbon auditing, and I recognise a couple of names in the group as well. So we're also energy brokers. So we manage a portfolio of around about £90 million worth of energy procurement, which is simply helping businesses find cheaper and hopefully greener energy contracts as well. So on top of that £90,000 portfolio, around about 70% of our clients choose a green energy tariff, which equates to about 12,000 tonnes of carbon emissions that have been saved so far. This is fairly informal, really. So as well as going through questions at the end, I'm happy Elspeth will pick up any questions as you go as well, and we can maybe take a break for some questions as and when they come up. And it would be good to get some feedback from people. Obviously, you've joined here today with an interest in it, so if you have got a burning question, please don't hold back. So most people will be familiar with solar. You'll see it on a lot of houses, a lot of commercial businesses. There's an awful lot of it already installed, 15 gigawatts of solar, which sounds like a big number, but to put that into context, it's around about enough power to power 11 million homes a year. And what happened with solar was around about 2009, 2010, when I first got into the industry, there was a demand there for solar because there was a financial return on investment. It was particularly on the small commercial side and the domestic side, and that was subsidised by the feed-in tariff, which was a scheme some people might be familiar with, where essentially the government paid you to put the solar on in the form of paid per kilowatt of energy that you generated rather than a one-off grant. And that set up an industry, essentially. There was a lot of solar installed. It was offering around about a 10% return on investment, which meant people deemed that attractive enough to invest in it and take the money out of the bank and make it work a little bit harder. And that scheme ran, it was a well-intentioned scheme, but it had a little bit of a rocky road in the way it was administered. So that ran for about 9 years, but in that time, the amount of subsidy received wavered and it went off to nothing, essentially. And unfortunately, it stopped too soon. And when it stopped in 2019, energy prices were still quite low and the cost of the equipment was quite high, and it just killed the solar industry overnight, essentially. And about 80% of renewable energy companies stopped trading within 12 months of that. But what's happened in the meantime, there has been a global demand for solar. Energy prices have been on the increase. So back in 2010, you're talking about 7 pence a kilowatt for your electricity. Up until September last year, you were maybe talking around about 15 pence a unit, and this week you're probably somewhere in and around the sort of 55-60 pence a unit mark for commercial electricity. So electricity prices have gone shooting up. The cost of production for the panels has come down because of the global market. So actually we're in an interesting position now where, although there's no subsidies, no grants for solar in particular, you've got a really attractive investment opportunity again, where you're talking about a payback period of something like 5 years as a maximum. You've got a system where I was on the phone to a client this morning. They had a system installed in 2012. It cost them £130,000. The second system they had in 2015, that cost them £65,000, and they want another system now, and that's £35,000. And that's just purely because the cost of the equipment has come right down. So we've seen an explosion in the solar market this year, with a 600% increase in installations just in the last 12 months. I'm really going to whiz through this. Hopefully people are familiar with some of this. The big ticket items, the visual items, if you like, are the solar panels. You've obviously got to fix that to the roof or to the ground, and there's a mounting system designed for that. And the bit that maybe people don't often consider is the inverter. So while the panels are generating the electricity, the inverter turns that into usable AC electricity that you can then use to offset your bills or export any excess to the grid. And again, I'm not going to run through this in great detail, but essentially the solar panels generate DC electricity. It is fed into the inverter. As I say, that converts it to AC, which is then fed back into a fuse board, and that power's got to be used at that moment in time. I'm not going to cover batteries right now. We'll maybe go through that in the questions. But that power either gets used because there's a demand. In this domestic image, there's a washing machine, or otherwise, if there's any surplus electricity, it goes back to the grid. So there's lots of different ways of installing solar. The traditional one in the bottom left-hand corner there is your roof-mounted commercial solar system. You get ground-mounted arrays of various different sizes, from solar farms down to a smaller domestic system like the one in the top left. And now that people are very conscious of their energy demand and trying to utilize the roof space that they've got, a flat roof system is very appealing as well. And that's a non-penetrating system, so you're not drilling into a flat roof. This just simply sits on top, it's weighted down, and it allows you to generate an income or a saving from a flat roof. So obviously there's a reason why. Why is there a 600% increase in demand for solar? And it's quite simple. It's just that equation of energy bills have gone up 600%, and people want to do something about it. And solar is typically the easiest, most accessible, most practical solution for a lot of businesses. It's not the only solution, and it is important to look at it in a wider picture. Just as a caveat, solar will reduce your bills by generating electricity, but it's really important, first of all, to actually understand your energy usage and try and reduce that first. Be more energy efficient, look at behavioral changes and wasted energy, because it may mean that the solar you install goes further, or you don't need to install as much solar to have the similar benefit. So this is just part of a wider solution, a wider array of solutions. So obviously there's a saving on electricity bills. The attractive thing for solar is it's a fit and forget technology almost. So you can install it now at a fixed cost, a one-off cost if you like, and know for the next 20 years with a good degree of certainty how much electricity it's going to generate and what impact that's going to have on your future bills. A lot of people are using it as an investment opportunity and looking at roof space, which traditionally is just, it sits there doing nothing, but there's an opportunity to turn your roof into an income generator. And as electricity prices have gone shooting up, the value of any electricity that's sold back to the grid has gone up in line with that as well. So actually selling electricity back to the grid can be an investment opportunity in itself. And all of this, combine all that together, and you get a payback period that might be as little as 2 years. or 50% return on investment, ranging up to a typical maximum of around about a 5-year payback, 20% return on investment. And what's important there is this is for a system that has typically a minimum 10-year warranty on any component, and the panels have a 25-year performance warranty as well. So this is relatively low cost. It takes up very little time. As I said before, it's a kind of fit and forget solution. And a customer put this to me a year or two ago and really took this on board. They saw it as essentially forward buying a portion of their energy at fixed cost. So let's say there's a system that costs £10,000. If you were to say to British Gas, I'll give you £10,000 now, but I want a discount on my energy bill for the next 20 years, which equates to £30,000 in saving, you would probably do that if you could guarantee that they were going to still be trading in that time and they were going to honour the agreement. Well, that's what solar is. Investing £10,000 now in some solar panels means that if you look at the amount of electricity it generates over the next 20 years and you amortise that cost, it gives you a cost per kilowatt of something like 5p a unit, which is obviously, well, at 50p a unit at least now, it's a 10%, 90% saving. There's other financial elements to this as well. So at the moment, there's 130% tax allowance on solar, which is due to finish on the 31st of March, which doesn't give people a huge amount of time, but it would be interesting to see if that gets extended. There was no mention of it last week. But there is the more traditional capital allowances that solar falls into. And although, again, I haven't got a slide on this, depending on where you are and when and the type of industry you're in, there is an opportunity for potentially a little bit of grant or subsidy funding. So I don't want to get into the numbers too much, but this was an example that we just had on our system of a recent project. And for a £35,000 installation cost, you had an annual saving and income of just over £9,000. So that's where that payback period, that return on investment comes from. And if you take that over the 20-year period, minus the initial cost, £35,000 cost, it gives you over £200,000 net benefit from that installation. But it's not all necessarily about the financial numbers. There's other benefits to it as well. So if we've got anyone in the webinar now who's a commercial landlord, people are under pressure to achieve a certain EPC energy efficiency rating in order to be able to let commercial units. Typically, solar is the easiest way to increase your EPC rating, and at the same time, it makes a unit or a business premises a more attractive place to let, with the prospect of having lower energy bills. It is quite a visual showcase, if you like. It's an obvious sign that you're investing in a low carbon future. And as I said numerous times there, it's very low cost, low maintenance, and backed by a long warranty, giving it a lot of security. Solar itself isn't carbon neutral. There is carbon emissions that come with the creation of solar panels. A lot of these, the vast majority of these, are made in China, South Korea, and that's the inverters and the solar panels. So there's the manufacturing, there's the silicon mining, there's the transportation and the installation, all the carbon that goes with every aspect of that. But if you take that and offset that against the amount of avoided carbon emissions due to the electricity not being imported from the grid, then it gives you a carbon payback of about 2.5 years. So it is a quick return there. And you're looking at, once they're installed, that's it. There's no more carbon emissions with them, really. And for every 10 kilowatts of solar, which is something like 20-25 panels, you're looking at a carbon benefit of around about 26 tonnes. Over its lifetime, which again sounds like a big number. It is a big number, but to put that into context, that's like the average carbon footprint of 2 people in the UK. Is there a question, Elspeth? I can just see something pop up in the chat.
No, that's just a message from
All right. Okay.
Chamber of Commerce.
So solar might sound like a fantastic opportunity, but it's first of all, it's working out, is it the right opportunity, the right system for your business? So there's certain criteria that need to be met, looking at the suitability of the site, how old are the roofs, what direction do they point in, what are they made out of, they're not asbestos. When you use your electricity as well, obviously, as it's generated, it needs to be used as it's generated. So you'll get the most out of a solar array through the middle of the day and nothing at night. So looking at the profile of your energy use and how that would match the solar. Does it need planning permission? I'll come on to that. Grid connection, Joe's going to talk about that. And then it's about, at the moment, with it being a seriously busy marketplace for solar, it's looking at installers. Lots of installers are popping up overnight, as you would expect. People are diversifying into solar. So who is looking to install it? What's their design criteria? What accreditations have they got? There is a level of protection for domestic and smaller businesses. So, for example, we're a member of the Microgeneration Certification Scheme, which is a governing body particularly for renewables. And that every year we're audited on design, on the information we provide our customers, how we present things to customers, installation, handover, maintenance. So every aspect of that, making sure that that's scrutinized and people are getting the best fit solution for their organization. And we haven't discussed it there previously, but when we're looking at panels and inverters, there's lots of different manufacturers out there. Why would anyone specify one panel over another or one inverter over another? So it's important to understand what's being specified. So the process, first of all, to work out what can be installed is to understand what roof space is available. So most people, like ourselves, would do a desktop survey using roof space on Google, a site survey looking at things like the structural integrity of the roof, doing a structural calculation, looking at the electrical requirements and your existing electrical infrastructure. So that solar has to feed back into your fuse board before you can then distribute it out. Have you got a big enough fuse board? Are the cables big enough? There's lots of other design criteria that go with it, which might restrict, although in that top left-hand corner, that might look like quite a big roof, but it might be that there's a limit on the amount of electricity you can use. There's trees in that bottom right-hand corner there, so it's looking at shading as well. And all of that then should turn into a design and a proposal. So this is an example of a recent design that we've done. So it's taking a roof space, fitting the solar panels on that roof as best you can, and then the bit at the bottom is just an example of the technical element of it. So that graph there, the blue area is the predicted solar generation over the course of a year, and the red is the on-site energy demand. So coupling the two of those together to understand how much of the solar you're going to utilize. I mentioned planning before. It's not very often that planning comes up on commercial solar. It is typically permitted development. Outside of that, there's 5 criteria there. If you're installing more than a megawatt, which is roughly 2,000 panels, if you're fitting it on a flat roof, it's in the curtilage of a listed building or a conservation area, and if it's ground mounted and bigger than around about 9 square meters, which isn't a very big solar array. In those cases, it is likely that you need planning permission, or you'd certainly have to seek consent, which most people would be able to facilitate that. Someone like ourselves, we put the design drawings together and we can facilitate a planning application on behalf of our clients. Grid connection is the bane of our lives for larger commercial solar installations. There's lots of large roof areas, lots of people that want to generate a lot of electricity, but can't necessarily connect it because of the wider grid infrastructure. So I'll hand you over to Joe, because I'm sure solar installers are the bane of his life while we're all trying to work it all out. Joe, are you there?
Yeah. So yeah, I'll probably just quickly introduce myself then. My name's Joe Davis, low carbon engagement engineer for Electricity Northwest. I've been with the company 20 years now, previously design engineer. So I've been on the receiving end, let's say, of all the applications for the past probably 10 years. I've been doing generation. And I'm right in the middle of the FIT tariff when that came in, as Brian mentioned, it sort of went through the roof. But yeah, there's been a few changes, and yes, Ryan's correct. You know, the network constraints is the sort of bane of everybody's life. Everybody says there's a few things to get with these schemes, planning being one and grid the other, and then you're normally good to go. So I think what I'll probably run through, and I'll start off with an apology, because I've just been tracking my daily Amazon delivery, and lo and behold, it's about 2 stops away. So my dog will start barking. I'll run to the door and run back, and hopefully there's only a few seconds. So if you bear with me, I will share my screen, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'll stop sharing mine.
Yeah. Right. Let's have a look. Being a Teams user predominantly, I'm challenged here. So let's make sure I share the right screen. So hopefully you can see our website. Is that? Yeah. Right. So basically, if I go back to the beginning, our website will look something like this when you log on to it. We have got, I like to think, a good section for get connected. So this covers all aspects of new connections, including heat pumps, electric vehicle charging, and so on and so forth. So there's quite a lot of detail, but there is a section for generation and storage. And again, there's a number of different sizes. Basically, we all generation connections must comply with either G98 or G99, which is an engineering recommendation. So it's a UK standard, and you know, I think without scaring everybody, that's, you know, depending on how you go about these schemes. Normally, I think, as Ryan said, if you approach an installer, and the installer will look at all these aspects for you, the grid connection being one of them. So G98 is anything below 16 amps, so it's normally a domestic property, and G98 does actually fall under an install and notify process, as opposed to an application process. So again, you know, just repeating what Ryan said, as long as you appoint a qualified and authorized installer, they will be able to do everything for you. They should just be able to come along and give you a quotation, and they know this process inside out. They fill in the necessary forms and send them in to us, and we log them on our system. Anything bigger, you know, your connections up to 50 kilowatts, over 50 kilowatts, section on G99. So again, without, you know, there's a number of ways of applying, and again, you know, hopefully, you know, you have people who will do this sort of exercise for you. But in essence, the challenge we have, you know, this is our sort of a copy of our GIS system, and we've got all these sort of red lines, which is our 11 kV network. We've got the orange lines, which is our low voltage network. And unfortunately or fortunately, depending on where you're positioned in the world, it is sometimes just pot luck where you are positioned in line with what the grid is like in that area, and what we're doing to upgrade that. We have changed the number of policies recently to try and facilitate more embedded generation. We're putting, you know, we used to have lots of different sizes of cables. We now just put the biggest cable possible in. We're looking at that for transformers and other things. So any sort of reinforcement of the network, we will look at, trying to reinforce that. And we've got lots of people who are working with local authorities and other large developers, so we know what's going on in what area, and we'll hopefully reinforce the network prior to anybody coming along and putting things in. But in essence, what you've got is, we used to manage a distribution network that distributed power one way, and it was dead easy then to be a design engineer, and I take the mickey out of all my colleagues who are a bit older than me, but it was a lot easier back then. Like I say, all the power flowed one way. There was capacity everywhere and one thing or another. Now we're really sort of, demand has increased. Generation has massively increased, really. Over the 10 years ago, all DNOs, and a DNO being a distribution network operator, Electricity North West being one of them, all the DNOs would have had one or two engineers that looked at generation, and now it's I think currently we have, I think just in our sort of north and central patch, which covers Cumbria, I think there's a few people with literally, there'll be well in excess of 300 applications in our system at the moment waiting to be looked at. So what we have to look at is, I'll just use this as an example, or I don't think we'll get much chance of putting solar on a cricket ground, but if this property here wanted to put solar on the roof, somebody like Ryan and his team could submit the application to us. What we have to do, we have to look at the effects of maximum generation and minimum system demand. And what that means is basically in the middle of summer, that one day a year that we get glorious sunshine, everybody goes down to the pub, nobody's using demand or anything in the properties, no lights are on, no heating's on, so it's what we class as minimum system demand, and we then have maximum generation, and we're actually already in a position now where when that happens, the transmission network, which is the national grid network, the 400 kV network, is actually struggling, because the transmission network was never designed excuse me, to push power from the top of the country to the bottom of the country. The power stations have been strategically positioned to manage that. However, now, in the northwest of England, we're lucky enough to have all them beautiful wind turbines off the coast, and all the turbines that was put into Scotland. So we have now at times of maximum generation and minimum system demand, we have more generation than demand. You look at the south of the country, they've got the opposite. They've not got enough generation to support the demand. So National Grid is doing a lot of work at the moment to facilitate that. But from our perspective, we look at like our system and our network, what are the effects? And basically the effects are voltage rise on the system. So we have to ensure that the power quality is still within limits. So in other words, your volts don't go over 253 volts in a domestic or an LV property, and they don't drop below 216 volts. So, like I said earlier, predominantly we only ever had a problem with low volts because we only distributed power one way. So historically we start with the higher volts, and then that would distribute down and the voltage drop would come down. The problem we've got now is, like I said, we've got to maintain high volts in summer and low volts in winter, and so on and so forth. So that, again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but that's a bit of an overview of what we have to look at. And that's where, we have, going back to our website, we have, if you go into sort of meet the business connections team, there's a guy, and what I'll do is I'll put a series of these links on an email and send it out to Ryan, and Ryan can forward it on. But there's a guy here called Simon Taylor. He's now, it's probably not up to date this, but he's what we call a pre-application manager. So anybody who's looking, even thinking about a project, he's got a small team that will offer sort of surgery sessions So you can email Simon and you can get a meeting either face to face or on Teams or Zoom, and start looking at your roof spaces. The engineers in his team will have a quick look at the network up front for you, because sometimes there is some red flags, and we would be saying, you know, you absolutely 100% won't be able to sort of export onto the grid there. However, there is such things as export limitation schemes, which sort of removes the voltage rise issues. You'll only ever get a voltage rise issue when you're exporting onto the grid. So in essence, what an export limitation scheme does is monitor the the power flow. So it basically looks at your exit point where the interface for the grid position. And if you start pushing out onto the grid, it ramps your PV down. So it tries to manage the generation load with your demand load. So there's a few little things like that, and it can be the difference between, you know, big money. An export limitation scheme may cost you in the region of about £3,000, but if that removes, you know, £50,000 worth of reinforcement works, and I'll just leg it to the door, if you could excuse me for 1 minute. Apologies for this.
While Joe disappears, people like ourselves installers, we work very closely with Electricity Northwest, and I've got to say the team that we deal with for Lancashire and Cumbria are really good. They're good at communicating, and what we traditionally do as part of the whole thing is we put a grid connection application in for a prospective amount of solar, and the team at Electricity are very good at coming back. It's not a black and white yes, no. They'll often come back and say, well, you've applied for 100 kilowatts. There's going to be a significant capital cost to do that, but you can install 50 kilowatts without any upgrade at no cost, or they'll find a happy medium. So it is a great system for us to work with, and it does make it quite straightforward. There's just a time scale, you know, from us putting an application in to getting an answer is typically around about 8 weeks.
Yeah, it's like you know, just reiterate what I said earlier. Really, the volumes that we're seeing at the moment are, you know, they're huge compared to, and it's fully understandable, like you say, you know, because of the cost of electricity going to what it is now. These applications have absolutely, you know, gone through the roof, and they are. I think the LV applications are on a 45-day target, if you will. We can't. We're heavily regulated. We get targets that we can't exceed. The LV DGLV is 45 days. But like I say, if you're looking at any projects, it is sometimes worthwhile setting up these surgery sessions with Simon and his team, because they will look at, like I say, there is, again, without going into too much detail, there's another engineering recommendation called G100, which is like what I've just explained, the customer limitation scheme. So like Ryan's just said, if you've applied for 100 and it's going to cost a fortune to upgrade, you may be able to install sort of 90 kilowatts and limit that to 50 kilowatts, or you may be able to even put the 100 kilowatts in but limit your export to 50 kilowatts. So there is things aren't always sort of dead and buried, throughout that process. But yeah, I mean, pretty much other than that, like I say, I can put some links together just on our website. I mean, yeah, open to any questions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Joe. There was a question just there from earlier on, sorry, from Ian, saying, are solar cells getting more efficient? And what's interesting, the panel efficiency isn't increasing enormously, but the technology, the amount of energy that can be captured from a silicon is getting a lot better. So all panels from 10 years ago, they were roughly had an output of something like 250 watts. The equivalent sized panel now, very slightly bigger panel now, has an output of somewhere between 400 and 450 watts. So if you're looking to maximize, if you'd maximized roof space 10 years ago versus maximizing roof space now, you'd roughly get twice the amount of power out of that same roof. And the panels do get slightly bigger all the time. We're now up to 540 watt panels, and they're only fractionally bigger. They might be 30% more output, but only 15% bigger in size. I'm just going to share my screen to go, but yeah, thanks for that, Joe. And then that was kind of us coming to a conclusion anyways. You know, with solar, it is very attractive. It's a low cost, low risk investment opportunity. It's a great opportunity to make your roof have an income generator from your roof. And obviously there's the carbon savings as well, but there is the design criteria. It's important to have someone to work with on that design side, understanding your energy demand, looking at things like grid connection, planning permission, getting all of those barriers out of the way first, and then designing a well-suited system on the back of that. So we've still got another 20 minutes for questions. And I've got a question from Claire here. How efficient are solar panels if they're installed on a flat roof compared to a pitched roof? And I wonder if I'll share this conveniently. So this is a chart that's provided by our governing body, and it's incredibly boring to look at, but essentially what this means is it takes everything from up in this top corner here, you've got a perfectly flat roof, which is facing due south, and then right down to the bottom corner here, you've got a wall, which is facing due north. And without looking at the numbers, looking at the color coding, obviously a north facing wall, it's marked red, it's not a very good place to install solar, and the optimum place for installing solar is somewhere in here, which is a roof of about 30-40 degree pitch, which is facing south. But actually there's a wide scope of what is viable and what's not. So we install an awful lot of systems across an east and a west facing roof. The advantage there is you're able to utilize twice as much roof area. So and if you take a 15 degree pitch, which is a pretty standard commercial roof, on an east-west system, it generates a 10 kilowatt system would generate 7,200 kilowatt hours, whereas on a perfectly south-facing system, it would generate 8,190. So it's not significantly different. It's about 12% less output, but you can double your roof area. And on a perfectly flat roof, traditionally on a flat roof, we would actually put a system in place like I think we had an example picture there. So typically on a flat roof system, you would install it on a ballast system that lifts it a little bit off the ground, which gives you a little bit more output. There is a perfectly flat roof system as well, if for whatever reason that was viable. And there's been a couple of questions about batteries as well. And just for time, I hadn't put lots on there about batteries. There's certainly an emerging technology. The technology's there, it's very straightforward. It's a simple system of connecting a battery and a controller, which means any of that excess electricity that is generated can be captured, stored, and used at a different time. On a domestic level, batteries are fantastic, and they definitely make sense, particularly as more people are working from home and changing the working pattern, looking at smart technologies like washing machines, tumble dryers, dishwashers that can all actually, you can either set them to come on through the middle of the day. There's some of the better ones, they can look at the weather and work out when the best time is to turn on. Commercially, small commercial batteries are there, larger commercial batteries that might suit a system like that larger roof space in the bottom left-hand corner. We're keeping an eye on it. We're monitoring the situation. It depends on your driver. If you're looking at doing it for a better financial return, we're just waiting for the cost of the equipment to come down. Like solar did 10 years ago, it's just the return on investment is roughly it's an 8 to a 10-year payback for a battery that maybe has a 12-year warranty with it. So we're just hoping that the cost of that equipment will come down and there'll be a better return on investment. It is the right option for certain industry types. If you use a lot of power either end of the day or at night and very little through the middle of the day, which might apply to a dairy farmer, for example, then it might be that a battery is a lot more viable, but you'd be amazed at how much solar you are actually able to utilize and how little will go back down the grid. There's a question there about the cost of installation. So the things that dictate the cost of the installation is typically the roof type. So if you have a commercial tin roof versus a cement fibre roof, it's a different mounting system, which is going to increase the cost. But if you, as a rule of thumb, if you said roughly £800 a kilowatt, and the caveat there is if you're looking at fitting a system like the one in the bottom left, you're probably down at around about £600 a kilowatt. If you're looking at a ground mount system like the picture above it, you may be up at around £1,200 a kilowatt. But as a rule of thumb, £800 a kilowatt is quite a good number to look at. But many people like ourselves will offer free desktop surveys, desktop quotations as well, so we can actually give an accurate quotation as well as an accurate idea of what the benefit is going to be. There's a question about grants as well. Solar's become, it's not dependent on a grant anymore, and with that in mind, I don't think there'll be a huge opportunity for a lot of grants in the future. That's my own personal opinion. There has been little pots of money. So the Lake District Foundation had a small pot earlier in the year that was eaten up in no time at all. In Scotland, there's an interesting scheme which is facilitated by Energy Saving Trust, whereas that's an interest-free loan on anything that is low carbon related. At a 5-year interest-free loan, and at the same time they'll pay back up to 30% of the cost of the installation, which I think is capped at £10,000. So anyone north of the border, we do have clients going through that process. It is a very slow process to get approved for the grant. It's taken people about 12 or 13 months at the moment. Whether that's improving, but just based on the demand is the feedback we're getting. And there may be little sector-specific pots that come out, but at the moment, there's very little out there for grant funding and subsidy. And
just adding to that, with ourselves at Go Low Carbon, Electricity Northwest, and the Chamber of Commerce are all in a green business support network for Cumbria. So if grants and things do come up, we are usually the first to know about it, and we'll be able to communicate that to you right away. So we've got links for all of our socials and our newsletters and everything, and we do try and get that information to everybody as soon as we find it out, because like Ryan said, if there is little pots of money, they do get eaten up pretty fast.
Yeah, it definitely is a first come first served sort of mentality with a lot of these schemes. There is one at the moment, actually, Green in Eden as well. Anyone in there that comes under the Eden borough, it might be that scheme's still open potentially. But again, as I say, the best thing to do there is to get in touch, and we can direct people and work out what's eligible and not. There's a couple more questions here. Finding out, so Jerry's asked, is there any way of finding out about connection capability from Electricity Northwest prior to applying? So yeah, absolutely. We do grid connection applications on behalf of clients. We can fill the paperwork in. We have someone that does that. And as I said, then it's just 8 weeks to get that design back. Based on the number of installations that we've got a pretty, I'd like to think we've got a pretty good handle on what would be viable and what wouldn't be. If you're in the middle of Carlisle, Kendal, Penrith, out Workington, Whitehaven way, you've got a much better chance of getting connected than you would do if you were in the Eskdale Valley, for example. So we've got a pretty good idea about what's viable and what's not, but at the same time, it's best to get that application in and then you know where you stand.
Yeah, just to add to that, Ryan, like I said, Simon Taylor, who I mentioned before, and his team, like I said, these surgery sessions, if you will, you know, they can be done, like I say, face to face, over the phone, over Teams, whatever, you know. And like I say, if you go to them with a bit of a plan, saying X marks the spot, like I say, there's a couple of engineers in his team that will look at the network. You know, I mean, we've got you know, a bit of modeling software that we can put in, and it's relatively, you know, quick to do. I think, like I say, the reason why these applications are taking 8 weeks at the moment is just the sheer volumes. We cannot sort of get the resource trained up quick enough in line with, with what's happened with the electricity industry at the moment. So it is just purely volumes what's taking the numbers, but that's why we've got this new engagement team within the connections team. So it's, yeah, if you've anything, you know, that you want looking at a bit of a quick, you know, overview, high level assessment, they can do that pretty sharpish.
Yeah. Just a couple more questions. I'm just gonna run through those as quick as we can. I'm just conscious of time. We've got about 10 minutes left. Sam's asked a couple of questions. One about the lead time to get a solar installation up and running. If you made an instruction today to design a system. So I can only speak on behalf of ourselves and maybe a little bit on behalf of Joe as well. The fastest lead time is we're working backwards from the restricting factors. So for us personally to turn a proposal around is typically within a week. And then that would be subject to grid connection, for example. So what we'd expect there. So if someone likes the figures and they want to provisionally go ahead on that basis, then we can put a grid connection application in for that, and then that starts that clock ticking for that 45 working day period to get an answer from Electricity Northwest. In the meantime, we can reserve installation capacity, do technical design surveys, have materials provisionally ordered. So our way of working at the moment is we're ordering panels by the container load, so that we've got enough stock to keep us going. There is a pretty good supply chain at the minute for panels, inverters, standard fixings, and we're doing our bit to try and hold stock to keep us going. So all of that lines up. 8 weeks later, you get a grid connection application back that says, yes, everything's fine. We would expect to be on site and installing within 4 weeks of that. So you're looking at around about a 12-week turnaround time. And I don't, because that grid connection application, you just can't go any faster. Our own personal installation capacity, we're growing our teams, we're growing our design people. We've had, I think we've got 4, 5, 6 new starters in the second half of this year. So just trying to just like Joe said, trying to capitalize on it, make sure that we're not increasing our lead time. And there's another question from Sam about the lifespan of solar panels, and that ties in quite well with Claire's question about disposing of solar panels when they're at the end of their life. So the panels themselves, the better manufacturers have a 25-year performance warranty. So they will degrade ever so slightly, around about 0.5% of their output per year. So by year 25, they should be generating at just over 80% of their initial rated capacity. Now, they're expected to go a lot longer than that. If they've got a 25-year warranty, they could have a 35, 40-year lifespan. It might just be that they get superseded by some other technology that we're not even talking about now that might come to the front in 15 or 20 years' time. But there will be a time when those panels need to be taken off the roof and disposed of. And that has been highlighted. It's been a bit of a point of contention in the industry. And the majority of solar installers have actually signed up to a recycling scheme, a commitment. So the majority of the panels can be recycled. It hasn't been particularly easy and well publicized, but certainly by the time that the earliest batch of panels need to be replaced in the next 10, 15 years, then that should be a standard thing, I'd like to hope. Some more questions here about can you have a solar system that could cover the energy used by machines in a manufacturing process? So again, this comes down to system design. I personally, I'm very analytical. We're very design led in this. We have some monitoring equipment on some sites at the moment. So a good example would be a manufacturing site in the Midlands that we're working with, and we've had some energy monitoring on their site for a week. We've got data for their energy demand every 4 seconds, which we can then turn that into a graph, overlay that against predicted solar generation, and look at how much of that they're going to utilize on site and how independent of the grid they're going to be. You're not going to get a system that will take you off grid all through the year. You're going to have rubbish days, particularly this time of year, where it's going to do very little. You've got short days through the winter. There'll be times in the summer where you're totally off grid and you're generating more power than what you need necessarily. But all it takes is a cloud, a summer shower, something like that, and your generation drops. So you can certainly look at a system that is practically designed to give you the best return on investment, utilize your roof space the best. And for some people, it might be looking at ways that they change their operating procedure. So we've had dairy farmers who might traditionally generate ice and have a cooling system at night. Through the summer months, they might change that to through the middle of the day to better utilize that power. There is some more questions here. Sorry, just running through, not in any particular order. There's a question here about what panels would you recommend? So I think really that's probably a question that would be better answered outside of this. There's a number of manufacturers and they're actually independently rated. So conveniently, there's what's called the Bloomberg Index, and panel manufacturers are rated based on how long they've been going, their production output, range, their warranties, manufacturing facilities, their bankability, they call it, their liquidity, and all of that means they're either rated a tier 1 manufacturer or a tier 2 manufacturer. In this country, we shouldn't be going anywhere near a tier 2 manufacturer. Most of them will be very similar. For us personally, the thing that dictates what equipment we use is based on the size. So essentially, fitting solar on a roof is getting one rectangle and fitting as many of them as possible on another rectangle. And some panels are long and thin, some are shorter and wider, and it's looking at which one best fits the roof space. We talk about panels, and panels typically get the most mention, but actually, personally, I think it's the inverter that is most important. While a panel has a 25-year performance warranty, some inverters have a 5-year warranty, some have a 10-year warranty, and if any part of that system is going to need replaced, it will be the inverter. It works the hardest, if you like. So it's looking at the right inverter manufacturers. Everyone that we use has a minimum 10-year warranty. There are other types of inverters that have a 20-year warranty, but may or may not be well suited, depending on the what you're trying to do on site. So it's looking at every aspect of that system and looking at best fit solution. And there's a question here about disposal. So would the installers dispose of the panels, or would that cost be the company that has them installed? So as I say, it's so early doors now. We certainly, as installers, we don't allow a figure in there for disposing of the solar. It would be relatively straightforward. It would just need a scaffolding and then someone to take it down. What would likely happen is you might leave the majority of the fixing system in place. So it would be very close to the roof, you'd hardly see it, and it just means you've not got any holes, you're not having any remediation works on the roof. To be honest, come 25, 30 years time, you're probably due to replace the roof anyways. So there will be a cost for someone to take that down in the future, and no doubt there will be a marketplace. Someone will have a business there to remove all the solar systems. Jerry's asked a question here, which I'm going to struggle to answer, in all honesty. Would adding solar or anything else to a system affect the distribution costs, which are essentially within your electricity bill? So this is your DUOS and your TUOS charges as well. My honest answer is I'm not 100% sure.
Right, and do you want me to quickly answer that one?
Yeah, go on then, Joe. Get me out of jail.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, basically, your electricity bill is split up into your GWOS payments, etc., etc. I'm not 100% certain myself how it works, but basically, when you've got an electricity bill and you're paying for whatever kilowatt hours that are coming into your property, what the PV will do is, for simple terms, if you're like on a domestic property, if you're producing 3 kilowatts from a 3 kilowatt system and your washing machine is using 3 kilowatts and your PV runs for 2 hours while the washing machine runs, you just won't get charged that 3 kilowatt, at 34 pence, so it'll be roughly £2 that you get charged. So the GWOS charges are normally or sometimes even hidden in the bill. They're based on sometimes the standing charges, etc., etc. But it's part of your bill breakdown, so it doesn't really, reduce that. It just reduces the kilowatt hours that you get charged.
Okay, thanks for that, Joe. That was going to have to be something that I was going to have to research. I think I've covered all the questions that are in there at the moment. I know we've just gone on to 3 o'clock here, but if there's anyone that's got any more questions, then feel free to put it in now. But alternatively, this is just potentially a start of a conversation for some people. There was a lot of questions there, and we're always happy outside of this if anyone wants to get in touch. I see the email address, so probably better looking at Ryan at Go Low Carbon. The one above's just missing an R out of carbon. But if anyone wants to get in touch, we're always happy to have a phone call, email. And I'm based just outside of Carlisle. Elspeth, you're in Glasgow, but we've got members of the team all over the northwest and southwest Scotland as well. So if anyone wanted an on-site meeting and a survey to look at roof space or any other energy related, carbon related things, so people that might have missed previous webinars on energy efficiency, other energy technologies, it might be LED lighting, energy monitoring, smart controls, it might be understanding your carbon footprint, answering tender questions relating to carbon emissions and carbon reduction commitments. There's lots of conversations that might happen outside of this, and very difficult to fit it all into an hour. So I think the best thing to do is we'll share all this information. Joe, you're going to share some bits as well, and then feel free to get in touch.